G'day guys, Mac with the Outer Circle, and today I want to talk about this. Well, actually, I don't want to talk about it, but a particular comment that was made to me makes me want to talk about it. So, the whole thing going on here is 28mm Mag is doing a competition all about female Space Marines. Build, convert, paint, enter it into their competition. Okay, fine, whatever. It's not up to me to tell a person what sort of competition to run. It doesn't affect me in the least. But the two things that stood out to me, well, one is this particular line here, where they say, "The theme of the competition is female Space Marines. We want to see your take on women in the ranks of the Emperor's Astartes." Okay, fine. Silly idea, but fine. How will they look when Games Workshop finally decides to add them to the 40k setting? Why? Why the fuck should they add them? The fluff doesn't allow for it. So, the interesting arguments you always see thrown up about this is, it's about representation. I need this in order for me to feel like I can get into the hobby. That type of thing. There are people who play Orcs, there are people who play Eldar, there are people who play the Fishman in the mecha suits, people who play the deadly killer robots. Last time I checked, human beings were none of these things. Something does not have to perfectly represent you in order for you to be able to get into it, okay? It's a stupid way of looking at things. The game is what it is. The fluff is what it is, and I hate the morons out there who say, "Oh, the fluff has always been changing." Really, it's always been changing. Prove it to me. Because they like to go back and point out things like, "Oh, Marines were just regular humans in Rogue Trader." Okay, what about from 2nd edition onwards? What about from 1994 to now? Because you have a pretty much 30-year-long uninterrupted streak of what Space Marines are, what Primarchs are, what the Eldar are, what the Tau are, what the Necrons are. The Necrons are the biggest change, and that still happened in 5th edition, and that rankled a lot of feathers. It didn't completely change them, but it changed enough of their background that it annoyed people. And, that was, 10 years ago now? When that change happened? Still, 30 years. At what point do you say the canon is the canon? Okay? Little tweaks happen here and there. Things are introduced into the game. I get it. Fine with it. It will happen. Some things are, they're silly changes, the way that they shoehorned in Primaris Marines and the fluff. Could have been done better, but there's nothing to say they couldn't do it, necessarily. So these people don't care. These people have come in and they're deciding to change the hobby to suit a narrative they have constructed. And at what point do you say, no? At what point do you interfere? At what point do you gatekeep? That's the question I'm raising. Because to me, I feel like this is the line. Right here, where something has to be said. Because I don't think this improves the game to do it, and I think that's the key. If it doesn't improve it, why do it? And there's no justification they could probably give me where they do so, because, like I said, the main justifications are things like the fluff is always changing. Well, no, it pretty much has been set in place and just expanded upon for 30 years, not outright changed. And also, the fact that, we need representation. Representation of what? If you want Space Marines, you've basically got it in the Sisters of Battle. Or would you prefer we completely change the Sisters of Battle from being Sisters of Battle into Misters of Battle or something like that? It's just silly to do so. You have bought into this universe, this established universe, decided you liked it, and now you want to change it. Well, at what point does a person's desire to change this universe outweigh my desire to keep the universe the way it is? That's what I want to know. Where does my opinion count in this? Because the comment that stood out to me, and this is the second thing I wanted to bring up in this video, that made me want to make a video on this, where I probably was going to brush it off. I commented on the post, but I was otherwise going to brush it off. The thing that stood out to me was the person said, "It doesn't affect your hobby." Well, hang on a minute. It does affect my hobby when you're trying to change the entire hobby. They want to introduce female Space Marines into the 40k scene. They're not acting like, wouldn't it be cool if? They're saying, Games Workshop will do it. How will they look when they do it? That is what they're saying here. That does affect my hobby. This isn't just a painting competition with a silly idea, okay? This is 2 steps removed from that. This is, we know they're going to do it. We're going to force them to do it. We think it needs to be done. We think that you're any kind of phobe, bigot, whatever, if you don't do it. That is affecting my hobby. I like my hobby the way it is. There are problems. 90% of the problems have to do with the company's attitude towards the customer. And there are some gameplay issues in there, the way that they handle things. Agreed. It makes up the majority of what we talk about on this channel. But, at the end of the day, people are trying to change what this hobby is. They bought into 40k. Maybe the people running this mag have more investment than I do. I mean, I've been around since 2nd edition 40k. And I'm not saying they're not wrong to have an opinion or a desire to change something. That's fine. But at what point does their desire outweigh my desire? Because it seems to be the only way it works when discussing things like this with people. Oh no, they need to introduce female Marines. Oh, they need to do this. They need to change that. They need this kind of representation. Hang on a minute. Who the fuck are you to decide that? I think they don't. Alright, have we now not just hit an impasse? At the end of the day, the background lore says no. And my personal feeling is no. I think the majority of people's personal feeling is no. But these people don't care. And they don't care about the universe, they don't care about the lore. And that's why they want to come up with excuses as to how they can change the lore to make it happen. Well, I'll put it to you this way. If the lore is so flexible, so easy to move the goalposts and change it up, what investment do I have in the game? You see, the background universe is nothing if you change it on a whim. There is no stakes, there is no wondering if your character's going to survive to the next book. There's no caring about them, because it can just be changed on a whim. So, this is where the gate is. When it comes to gatekeeping, I could talk all day about gatekeeping. I have many thoughts on that. In fact, let's do it now. I want to talk about gatekeeping and cancelling. They're 2 things I've noted popping up more and more of late. I was in the middle of production of a video on gatekeeping when Arch went and released a new video on the very subject, and he raised some valid points. Like, where do you begin with gatekeeping? I mean, I've just laid out a clear example of what I think it should be. But, well, let's go with the cancellation first, okay? Let's think about someone like Arch himself, because I think that's interesting. Because you love him, you hate him, you think he's left-wing, you think he's right-wing, it doesn't really matter. At the end of the day, I'm going to lay out a scenario here. Do yourself a favour and listen to him before you lose your shit. Arch holds views, okay? This is the scenario, not the reality. And at some point people will decide they agree with him or disagree with him, based on either an actual understanding of his views or no understanding, but something they think he means. Now, you might decide he's a supporter of some ideology you do or don't agree with, but let's pretend his ideology is one you disagree with. My question to you is, what do? You have a choice of what to do. It's either unsub, quick off his work, or you go after him. So people do this, they go after him, they try and cancel him. My question is this, if you go after him, what is your endgame? What is your goal? Do you want him off the internet? If you succeed, then what? Are his views just erased from existence? Do you think the people he was brainwashing are somehow free? Have you defeated this message of this ideology you've assigned him? No, obviously not. If you try and pull his sponsors or his revenue streams, you somehow think that fixes the perceived problem. You'd rather a man was homeless and starving on the streets than expressing his views? Meanwhile, we still publish certain viewpoints of an Austrian dictator from the 1930s, but this guy's the one you're going to cancel? Or is it because the particular values you've assigned the guy in certain videos are bad, and therefore anything that's done to him is valid? Do you see a problem here? Do you see a problem with going down this path? Even if you cancel him, you've not defeated his ideology, you've simply embittered the man, and embittered those who support him. Even when people succeed to get him removed, they don't stop there. They hound people when they change platforms. There can be no recovery, no reconciliation, no moving on. They will keep getting fired from every job, everything they go to in future. They must pay for the sin of their words until such time as they cease to exist. It's just an interesting thought. And it ties into this right here. It's all about representation until someone disagrees with it. People treat others with opinions they disagree with as something so abhorrent that human ears cannot hear such language. I haven't once said whether he's right or wrong, or whether people creating this are right or wrong. I just disagree with them. You know, I've not voiced any opinions which he might hold, but you can be damn sure people will say something about them in the comments. It's irrelevant, however. Let's say you think he's some far-right representative and he spouts off some strange ideas. If the ideas are bad, they'll be revealed as such through the discussion and dissection of the ideas. Simply saying, you said bad thing, and then trying to drive a person from the internet has to be the least productive way to turn them to your train of thought, which I've ever heard. It's ridiculous. It's ridiculous that this is even a thing. It's even more ridiculous that once cancelled, that's still not enough for people. Don't fall into that trap, guys. So, moving on from that topic, let's think about gatekeeping itself, and some of the points that have been raised over several videos by several people. Here are some of note. People moving into the hobby, they seek to change it. They have no history with it and no right to change that into something new. That's one reason why people gatekeep. Another reason is people use the term gatekeeping as a way of putting down those who seek to maintain the integrity of something. What I'm doing right now, pointing out the hypocrisy here in that they've decided arbitrarily that Marines should be females, and Games Workshop will do it. If I have a go at that, I'm gatekeeping. I'm ruining their hobby. They came in and ruined mine, but that's fine, because it's them doing the ruining. Gatekeeping isn't designed to prevent new blood entering a hobby, it's designed to keep people who want to ruin the existing system from entering it. And rules and standards exist. They were set up by the people who designed the game long ago, and whilst a person is free to do their own thing and interpret the hobby their way, the people around them are under no requirement to have to support or condone such behaviour, and this is a perfect example. I mean, let's go through those points, just one by one, okay? What do we do? People moving into the hobby who seek to change it. If they have no history with it, and therefore they have no right to change into something new, as a concept, I agree with that. The thing is loved for what it is. It may not be perfect, it may have some flaws, but you cannot just roll in day one and start trying to reorder things. I'll give an example here of my own bias, okay? It's a little long in the tooth, but give me a go here, because what I'm thinking of is Dust Tactics, okay? Dust Tactics is a cool IP. It's an alternate reality where alien technology is captured by Germany prior to World War II, and they reverse engineer really powerful weapons which radically alters the power balance of World War II in that game setting. And then, of course, the Soviets eventually captured German technology, increasing their own technological level. After being backstabbed by Britain and America, they even opened a second front against the Western Allies by invading North America. Okay, it's a cool story, but it ignores the logistics of war and doesn't explain them away. For example, how do you defeat the Allied navies, the greatest threat to the Axis and Soviet powers prior to and after World War II? Something both opposing sides basically completely lack versus the two largest navies in the world, the Royal Navy and the US Navy. How can the Russians even afford to invade the USA when their manpower in World War II was so critically drained that even when they were winning the war in 1945, they were at their absolute limits? They were literally kept propped up basically by Lend-Lease, allowing them to remove people from factories and from, the oil fields and such, because the Americans were supplying their material needs. Now, you can ignore these logistical questions or hand-wave them away, but they are what they are and they're very real. So am I right? On a technical level, yeah, probably, but it doesn't give me a right to go into the Dust community, kick in the door, say, okay nerds, here's your new fluff. The universe which interests me, that Dust universe, is the one they have created, even if some bits make no sense to me. So, is that an example of gatekeeping? What about when people use the term gatekeeping as a way of putting down those who seek to maintain the integrity of something? Well, it's true. Gatekeeping is treated as a derogatory term instead of standard that's applied by a group. Why do we have competency tests and licenses for equipment? A license to drive your car, a license to use a crane, a forklift. That's a form of gatekeeping, usually for safety reasons. Even people who can completely safely use something, maybe a boy who grew up on a farm, driving tractors all his life, he can't just go and drive a tractor for a construction company, he needs to get a license for it. We have rules in sports, so as to, somewhat level the playing field and leave the the human, not the equipment, as the random factor. Gatekeeping is not bad by default, but it's portrayed that way. Gatekeeping isn't designed to prevent new blood entering the hobby, it's designed to keep people who want to ruin the existing system from entering it. This is often the biggest point which people raise. They say gatekeeping is bad, and this is where their mind immediately goes. If a person walks up showing interest, and they're just immediately told without expressing any other ideas to go away or that they're unworthy, yeah, that would be a bad thing. But that's so rare. I almost cannot think of a time in my life where I've ever seen anyone rational do such a thing. Instead, people are usually willing to let fresh faces into any hobby. In fact, in my experience, most communities go out of their way to be welcoming to new blood. Whether it's racing cars, shooting rifles, training animals, painting plastic models. It's not normal behaviour to simply deny entry on site to people. It begs the question, why is this the first thought people go to? And last of those 4 big points is that rules and standards exist. They were set by people who designed the game long ago, and whilst a person is free to do their own thing and interpret the hobby their own way, the people around them, they have no requirement to support or condone such behaviour. Why should they? This is my own pet peeve, and it's probably my biggest personal wall. You cannot build and paint... Well, you can, I should say, build and paint whatever you want. But I'm under no obligation to feed you compliments for doing so. And who am I to judge? Nobody. But I can see the criteria. What is the criteria? It's in every codex, every White Dwarf, every book on the game, every painting tutorial Games Workshop ever put out. There's a standard, and it's a broad spectrum. So for you to fall outside of it enough that it's worth mentioning, it's probably not a fucking mystery why. It's probably because something is so bad or so poorly thought out that people collectively say no. The Warhammer community is home to a huge subset of people who are probably socially awkward. Painting models is a niche, and so people who normally may find it hard to fit into other social circles are generally welcomed into this one. People who meet a range of stereotypes are in this hobby, and anyone who's currently typing angry response to this video, they're probably trying to argue with some objective fact there. It's not pulled from thin air when we say deodorant should be a basic requirement for entry into a hobby shop, so for like a person to do something so poor that the people around them have to say something, it's probably a pretty bad sign in this hobby. Because it both is and isn't your hobby. The hobby was created by Games Workshop. You participate in it, and although they may have changed some core fundamentals over the years, it's up to us to provide them feedback, but not have total say over them. Not to say that Games Workshop will introduce female Space Marines, and it needs to be done in order for people to have proper representation. It's probably ironic to many who are listening and look at this channel and think, hang on, isn't your goal to tell them what to do every day? By the by, it isn't. I want to appraise them of their mistakes, not to control their entire company direction. The problems start when new blood enter and say, you have a universe here, 40k, but it isn't exactly what I want, so let's change some dumb new ideas. They're new, they have zero investment, they didn't sink their money and efforts into the hobby over the years, building it, growing it, supporting it, and they want to come along and change it? How do you think people already in it are going to feel about it? Because that's how I feel about this. 28mm mag comes along and they say, we want to have a competition with female Space Marines. Fine, go for it. Doesn't affect me. Until the point where they say they should be introduced, they will be introduced. That's what affects me, and especially reading through the comments from 28mm mag and Wilhelm Miniatures and how they are framing it. This class struggle that they're framing it as, introducing politics into what should be a simple painting and conversion competition. That shits me. If you say it's a racist game, and we like it, you're calling us racist by default. It's a bad move. It's why gatekeeping exists, because the people in the community don't need the drama created by these people, the problem finders. So call me negative all you like. I'm mostly asking for 2 things. Show concern for the desires of the wider community from Games Workshop, and lower the price barrier, which is truly the biggest gatekeeper of all. And last point on this wild tangent of cancel culture and gatekeeping and things like that is what to do at this point. Well, what to do is simple. Just change the wording of your project here. Okay, it's not about leftist tears or some crap like that, like it's being bandied around the comments. The point of this competition here should just be, hey, we want to do something fun and weird and different. We're going to ask people to convert up female Space Marines. And that should be the end of it, instead of it becoming some political statement through not only their own words, but their comments. It's a shit show. And the fact there's hundreds of comments on these threads, like, when do you ever see, combined between Wilhelm Miniature's page and 28mm Mag page here, there's like 400 something comments. When do you see 400 comments on an Instagram post for miniatures? That should give you some idea of the controversy. And like I said, when something is broadly within the spectrum of what's acceptable with Games Workshop, nobody really complains. But the minute you step outside of that very blurry, subjective area, people jump on it. And that's what's happening here. So, am I against it? No. Am I telling them they can't do it? No. Totally up to them. You do you. But don't turn around and say Games Workshop will add them to the 40k setting and that this representation is required. There's representation there already. There's Imperial Guard, plenty of women in it. There's Eldar, plenty of women in it. Dark Eldar, plenty of women in it. There are whole fantasy races of women like Daughters of Cain. There's the Sisters of Battle in 40k. But then Space Marines, that's where you need to put your foot in. That thing that everyone, is more or less happy with now. You want to go in, you want to change the background of the universe, change the lore, change the fluff to make it happen. Okay, fine. Let's say you do all that. Let's say you achieve that nebulous goal. I got one little point to make to you. If these are genetically modified superhuman soldiers, dosed up on testosterone and steroids and organic meddling that's been performed, organ harvesting and all sorts of things, and why do you think they would look like women? They wouldn't. They would look like men, and looking at any female bodybuilder, Olympics, things like that, female powerlifters, they start to lose their feminine looks. What would happen when you graft another 300 pounds of muscle onto them and make them a 7-foot tall superhuman? They're probably not going to be running around in form-fitting boob armor, are they? They're probably going to look exactly like the men, in which case it's a silly idea. But hey, don't let that stop you. By all means, have your competition, just don't tell me how to feel about it. I'm Mac with the Outer Circle, closing the gate on this video.